Thank you for joining today. I'm Adi Gazit Blecher, the VP Marketing at Wisor, and I'll be your moderator for the 45 minutes. Before we dive in, a quick note on the format today webinar. Wayne will share his presentation and insight, and we'll have a live Q&A at the end. So please drop your questions in the chat as we go. I promise we will get to as many as we can. I have my own questions, Wayne, just make sure that you know that. Now let's talk about why we are here for. If you work in freight forwarding, you know that providing quick, accurate quote to customers is one of the most complex area to be addressed. The day-to-day is messy, a mix of digital platforms, spreadsheets, emails, and a lot of manual work in between. The hybrid reality is exactly what we are unpacking today. So I'm really glad to have Wayne with us. Wayne has worked extensively with freight forwarders and logistic technology companies, and he brings a perspective that's grounded in how things actually work. So Wayne, I'm super excited to have you with us, along with more than 100 people who I'm seeing here. So please, a quick introduction from your end.
Yeah, thanks, Adi, and very nice to be here. Thanks for having me. So again, my name is Wayne Tyndall. I'm based in Barcelona, although I'm originally from the US. And I've spent about the past decade working in logistics technology, primarily, although I did have a one-year stint where I also got to work as a freight forwarder as well, which was a lot of fun, and a great learning opportunity for me. But otherwise, I've been working in logistics net technology, primarily at Web Cargo by Freightos. And then in about since the past almost a year now, have been working with multiple software companies in an advisory role.
That's amazing. So the floor is yours, Wayne. Share with us your insights.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. So yeah, the topic for today, and just let me know, can you see my screen okay? If you have
Yeah, I
a
can see
question.
that.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, the topic for today is really looking at one of the most, I think, complex processes for a freight forwarder, which is really how to strategically look at your quotation engine, right? And looking at your quotation process, right? And really going from procurement and then into your pricing mode, and then what that looks like when it comes to actually pulling together a quotation for a customer. And that really is the central focus of really the first interaction between the forwarder and their customer, right? Um, so if we kind of kick off there, really, I think the story starts with procurement, right? And this is really, I think, since the pandemic, where it's really gotten to be such a challenge for forwarders. Prior to the pandemic, everything was still a bit complex, but it was very much okay. Pick up the phone, call an airline or an ocean carrier, trucker, get a price from them so that I can use that for a quote, or you had sort of kind of rate sheets that were valid for X amount of time, et cetera, that I was working from. But during the pandemic, where you really started to see the evolution of lots of other things happening. You had people, pulling pricing on WhatsApp from WhatsApps. You had airlines and ocean carriers creating their own portals where you would have pricing available. You had the advent really of dynamic pricing where price was sort of instead of these longer term contracts or longer term rate validities, you had pricing that was fluctuating and varying in as little as 20, 30 minutes, right? So it really got to be a really complex thing for freight forwarders to manage because you're trying to pull together, look at your pricing that you're procuring from customers, and you're having to go to, potentially dozens of different places just to look at, what you're buying at, and then potentially as well what you're selling at on the back of that, to even really get a full picture of what your pricing looks like. Yeah. That's really the first complication. And then in terms of how that translates into how you end up quoting your customer, I think we need to kind of split the conversation into two buckets, right? One thing is sort of the spot quote, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that first. When it comes to spot quoting, typically what happens with freight forwarders, and then all the forwarders on the call know this as well or better than I do. The first thing, the quote comes into an inbox or over the phone or on a WhatsApp, and a pricing team is then going to go out and start to collect pricing quotes from their providers, right? From ocean carriers, from airlines, from agents, from wherever that might be. And they're going to then gather, various quotes from different sources, and then try to pull that together into some kind of quote that I can then share with a customer and then send that off to them. Interestingly enough, that can take up to a few days at times. And that's just because the data is living in so many different places, and forwarders are having to go look in so many different places to find the pricing, that it's just extraordinarily time consuming. Yeah. Um, that's really the first complexity that I think we
Yeah.
need to look at, right? Is how long it
So,
takes to pull all that together.
so, Wayne, in your experience working inside forwarding operations, when you look at that list of rate sources, which one causes the most chaos in practice? Is it the emails, the spreadsheets, or something else?
Yeah, I'm just going to hop back to our first slide here. So I haven't sat in the operations part myself as much, more on the pricing and sales component. But I don't think that there's one that is more difficult than the other. I would say, kind of touching on what we talked about before, the emergence of dynamic pricing for freight is definitely a challenge because you have this inherent gap in time between, okay, customer sends me a request for a quote, I go find that pricing, I give it to my customer, and then the customer needs time to view it, review the options, and then come back to me and say yes or no, right? And if they say yes, this is where you kind of come up with this issue of, well, the pricing may have now moved since then. So that is a particular challenge, but otherwise, I don't think it's so much the single source as much as it is having to have pricing all over the place. It's having so many different sources for finding pricing that is, I think, what makes it really messy.
Yeah, agree. Thanks.
Perfect. So let's go on then, and then because pricing lives in all these different sources, etc., most freight forwarders today who are quoting are still doing this in a very manual way, right? They could be responding to quote requests on a WhatsApp, they could be quoting customers back on an email, or even over the phone. But why is that, right? Because that does provide some challenges to an organization. Obviously, when you have you know and like in terms of an organization, you've got people quoting in lots of different formats, different systems, etc. That by default means you don't have a single source of truth in terms of how many quotes I'm issuing as a company, what's my win rate, which customers are the ones driving the best margins, the best revenue opportunities, etc. Where am I missing the mark when it comes to servicing my customer? What do I need to do in terms of improving? Where do I need to focus my procurement effort? All that information that you can gain is really kind of gone. But again, the main reasons for why it's manual is again because there's pricing that is all over the place in lots of different areas. There's the whole topic of the dynamic pricing that we talked about before. And then there's also a lot of it in terms of, and I think especially with this industry, is that people are just used to doing things the way that they've always done it, right? And typically speaking, forwarders will go out and they'll try to use systems, etc. But when there's failure, and that failure tends to come from a lack of clean data on the back end, which can then result in misquoting or inaccurately quoting a customer, it leads to a lack of trust in the systems that are there. So for those reasons, people say, okay, I don't have the thing that is perfect. I don't have the thing that's really making this work. So I'll keep doing it the way that I've always done it, right? And that's really, I think, the first part about why the biggest reason that this kind of remains a manual process.
Yeah. So the trust gap, if I need to elaborate more on that, like I need to check it myself as an a freight forwarder. I need to check. So, in your experience, is that skepticism about the technology, like I'm not trusting it, or it's about the data? As mentioned by you, I think it's the data, right? It's just that
Yeah, I mean, you can have a look, it's kind of like the same old story of garbage in, garbage out, right? You
right,
can be using a system, but if you don't have the underlying clean data in the background, that is by default going to cause a lack of trust in the system that the people are using. Yeah. So while it isn't the most fun thing to talk about, the really when it comes time to think about, okay, how can I address those issues that we talked about before? Of how can I gain visibility? How can I gain insights? How can I start to be a more professional organization and how I quote and then how I'm working with my customers? You really need to deal first with the issue of having the clean data. Yeah, clean
right.
data will then ultimately result in trust being built in the systems that are used.
Yeah. So the shadow workflows point really resonated with me, like personal templates, inbox logic. How do you get a team to go those up when they've been working that for 4 years?
Yeah, it's all about change management, right? I think the first thing you have to do, and most people will tell you that we're humans, we're creatures of comfort, right? That's just who we are. But people need to understand the why if they're going to make a change
Right.
in how they do things, right? So I think that's where it comes in is when management oftentimes in companies goes in and says, okay, we're going to make a sweeping change, we're going to change this process or that process. Great, but what companies are often not great at doing is helping the people who are doing those or following those processes understand what's the motivation behind it and how does that make their jobs easier in terms of serving their customer. Yeah. If you give people the why and you show them that, okay, if we're able to do this, we're going to be able to achieve something down the line, and we're going to be able to provide a better service to our customer, which means it's going to make your life easier. You're going to be more fulfilled in your role and in your job. That's going to be something that really motivates a team.
Totally agree with you.
Cool.
Thanks.
So let's go on and talk a little bit about the next thing and the next area that I see being kind of a topic for for debate with forwarders, that there's a trade-off when it comes to quoting in terms of an urge and a need to get a quote out quickly to a customer, as compared to um, the other end where people say, oh no, I cannot get a quote out to a customer until I know it's 100% perfect, meaning I've got the right margins in place, I've got a clear commitment on my buy rates, etc. So you end up with potentially two different scenarios, right? I can get a quote out quickly, but it might have mistakes in it. Which could end up costing the company money, or it means I've overpriced myself out of a job. And then you have on the flip side where quoting then can take forever because we're kind of obsessed with perfection, right? And we're obsessed with getting the quote 100% perfect before it goes out. Most forwarders do kind of straddle both sides. Obviously, being able to quote fast is one of the major drivers, and this can be a bit mode specific, but it is one of the major drivers in increasing win rates. I think most of us know, and I think most forwarders have told me anecdotally, and others even in very much detail around the data, that your win rates can tick up, to over 30% potentially higher if you're the forwarder that's the first one providing the quote back to the customer, right? Um, so that is a thing to be thought about. But then you have on the other side where margins so often are so low on like especially on a spot basis, right? We're talking about spot quotes here. When we talk about those spots, the margins can be so low that there is a risk of losing money if the quote isn't accurate. So they're kind of doing this dance between these two core things. Yeah.
Mm.
And from there, and that's really thinking about the spot, right? But let's also talk a little bit about the world of tenders, yeah. So that's a completely different workflow for quoting, where shippers are going out to their forwarder or forwarders with hundreds or even thousands of lanes and service levels and pricing requests that have to go out. It's really complex, and if you kind of look at what the flow looks like, right, you might get these hundreds and thousands of lanes, and typically at a forwarder, there will be a very small tender team that's responsible for pulling together all of this pricing. By the way, in a very specific format that the shipper is going to require from them, and that then is a horribly stressful situation for those teams. When it's bid season, I often feel very sorry for tender teams because I know that they're probably not even sleeping very much. But they're trying to consolidate pricing, going out to local teams, to their countries, to their branches, trying to collect pricing and validate what they have, pulling together the data, trying to figure out how to combine rates and pricing across multiple carriers, et cetera, to create one single service level, put it all back in the format that the customer is requiring, and then get that back out in a very tight timeline, right? Because those tenders will come with a deadline for a response. And then you add on top of that with the tender story where those tenders, a lot of times shippers want those rates to be valid for, it used to be that they could maybe even needed to be valid for a year, maybe on ocean freight. That has changed, and you see it now more quarterly or sometimes even monthly for air freight. But again, in a world where things are more spot driven, where dynamic pricing, both in air and ocean, is becoming bigger and bigger every day, that's really complex, right? And so when you're an RFQ or a tender team trying to pull together all of that pricing, responding to that in a way that's going to be competitive with your competition, and is going to provide the right service and that is still going to provide profitability and do that in the timelines that you're given is really, really hard. Yeah, that can be a real challenge for forwarders. Um, the next thing is when you have both on the spot quoting side and then on the tender and the bid management, that leads to a lot of fragmentation, and that leads to really, a few issues that create costs for the forwarder. The first thing is when it comes to pulling together a quote, the vast majority of the time, 60, 70% is just spent on just trying to collect information, collect data, and verify that information, right? Additionally, when you're having to provide multiple service levels, you've got to go to at least five, maybe up to a dozen different locations just to try to source quotes, yeah, for a bid. And then the last time is even if you look at the people who are preparing the quotes between someone who's more junior and someone who's more senior, the individual pricing specialist who's pulling together the quote, the amount of time it can take them to do that, how they do it, and how successful they are is also going to vary enormously, right? So it's very difficult. A lot of times, new people who are coming into the industry and kind of sitting in these teams, there's a giant knowledge gap, right? Oftentimes because a lot of the information that the veterans have is really something that's just really more sitting in their head as opposed to being part of a clearly documented process or system. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then what does that mean for in terms of like commercial impact? The business is going to feel it ultimately because I think most businesses are looking to grow. They're either looking to grow by adding new business or adding new verticals, by new business via new verticals, or looking to grow the quality of service that they're providing to a customer or grow the business within existing accounts, etc. But by default, if you're looking to pick up more shipments, etc. That means by default more quotes. Those quotes take time. And then again, if we're following the way that we've always done things, then that typically means I just need to throw more people at it, right? So okay, if we're going to grow our number of shipments this year, 1.5x year over year, that's going to then translate into X amount of more quoting that needs to happen. So I need this many more people in order for that to work, right? So that makes scale really hard when you're having to just constantly add people to address the process of business growth, which then is compressing your margins, right? As an organization, where ideally what you want is to empower your teams to be able to work more effectively so that the output is greater from each of the individuals.
This is so true. And this is again, this is the question, like, where do you typically see folders getting their balance wrong? that they want to usually work really too fast and losing their margins, or too slow and losing deals. Like this is the kind of balance that they need to work on.
Yeah, the thing that I see, I think forwarders tend to lean more to, I mean, it depends on the forwarder, right? But I
Right.
see them more tending to lean towards the accuracy. So I mean, it might take them far longer to prepare the quote because they're obsessed with protecting their margin or protecting the quality of the rate or the quote that they're putting in front of the customer. But it can be all over the place, right? But I tend to see that naturally what happens is that it just takes longer to put together a quote and get it back to them because people tend to be more obsessed with the accuracy element.
Right. And you mentioned the tender environment, so I'm curious about the if it's completely flipped this dynamic, because with tenders it feels like that there is no choice. You need to be both fast and accurate.
Yeah, it's a high stress environment for the forwarder because you have to be extraordinarily knowledgeable and you need to be extraordinarily accurate because again, you're bidding on business for which can be quite large volumes of business, right?
Right.
And it needs to be pricing that's valid for a certain period of time, right?
Right.
You take a hit on a spot shipment maybe, and that's not you're not going to feel that as much as if you've misquoted I don't know, 40 TEUs a week, right? That's a very different story. But then again, those come with just extraordinarily tight timelines. Hence, again, those poor guys are often not sleeping a whole lot during bid season. So I tip my hat to all of you who are working on those bids.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. So let's go on. So what does even good look like when it comes to a forwarder? What am I looking to do looking forward and as as customers become more demanding, as more and more technology tools become available and forwarders are starting to adopt those, what should a forwarder, let's talk a little bit about what a forwarder should be thinking about when it comes to kind of putting a strategy around quotation solutions. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is cleaning up the mess around the rate procurement, right? And where those rates are living. Yeah. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to find a source of where our pricing is going to live, right? When you're having to go out to 5, 10, 12 different places in order to find pricing, that's not a good use of anyone's time, right? So the first thing is find a central place where that pricing can live. And just my own recommendation here is that does not need to be your TMS, right? Again, I've not seen every TMS in the world, but TMSs, as in general, are great execution platforms, but they are not rate management platforms, and there's generally not quotation management platforms either, right? But you need to have a centralized place to store rates. And maybe my second tip that I would add there is that if you're thinking about a solution where your own teams are the ones that are trying to kind of key all of this information into a place, that's not a great use of your time either. There are other ways that you can manage that, right? Um, the next thing that I would say that you need to think about and what good looks like, apart from having the unified, now you've got your rate structured, is then when you start to think about systems, you want to look at systems that are going to augment and assist humans in and assist the people in doing what they need to do. So you want systems that are able to kind of, flag potential issues, highlight where there's different options, etc. Let systems help human beings work more efficiently, but put the decision-making power in the with the person, right? That's where they really excel. They excel at having experience and understanding, especially in freight forwarding, a very complex world where something is always going wrong and supply chains are always disrupted for a reason A, B, or C. Let the humans with the experience make the decisions and let the system start to highlight and kind of ping them where it needs help, right? So put systems in place that will help the people do what they do best. And then next, when it comes to quoting, you need to be able to audit your quote. That's kind of what we were talking a little bit about before. you need to be able to look at the data insights behind your quoting because it's not good enough to be able to say, I quoted this much and this is my win rate, right? Or I need to quote this customer this price in order to win the business. That's a start, right? But you really need to understand the whys behind it as well, right? So again, if you don't have your quotes happening in a standardized fashion, following a process and living in a specific place, then it makes it very difficult to kind of look at big picture and understand the whys and what's happening with a customer or a branch or a specific business segment. Yeah. Um, so what do we want to look at? So if you're a forwarder and you're kind of starting out and you're doing the manual quoting over email, over phone, over WhatsApp with Excel sheets or whatever, what you see today, RFQ, comes into an inbox. The operator or the pricing team tends to pick that up. By the way, it tends to be first one in is the first one out kind of story. They start going and looking at Excel spreadsheets and web portals and calling carriers and sending emails. They start doing that. They start to build a quote into an email or some kind of spreadsheet and they send it to the customer, which could be 2 hours later or 2 days later. Yeah. It's still uncanny how often it's 2 days later, especially if you're a forwarder and you're depending on agents in order to also provide pricing. So you're also kind of subject to how long they take to get in your request so that you can get back to the customer. And at the end of the day, that complexity just compounds, right? And that the time that it takes to do that. What would your target be? If you start to think about as an organization, what do my KPIs look like for success? Um, there are certainly ways for you to use technology where if a quote request comes in, if you have, again, you have your clean data in place, right? There's no reason your system would not be able to sort of pre-populate the pricing that should be available for that quote, right? So that a pricing person can then review that, make tweaks, and then get a quote back ASAP to a customer. So you want your pricing team to then review that, make sure the system is flagging points where there's missing data to the quote. Am I missing information about the pickup and the time that it needs to be collected? Is there something special with this about this freight that I need? Is there an MSDS form missing on a dangerous goods shipment? Is there something that is missing in order for me to quote properly? So I can address that in a quick way. And then what you want is that you want a pricing person to be able to kind of go in, validate, adjust, add to, etc., and then get a quote back to a customer. And then ideally, you want to get that back, assuming that you've got the information you need, but get that back to your customer in under 5 minutes, right? So if you've got the clean data, that means you should be able to get the accurate quoting back. Yeah. And if you can do that in under 5 minutes, that's where you start talking about these win rates going up. And then again, based on how that quote has been pulled together and how your customers are interacting with the pricing that you've put in front of them, that's where you start to capture, okay, why did my customer do this? Why did my pricing team price it this way, right? What's happening with this piece of business? And that's where you start to get the insight so that as an organization, you can think about quoting more strategically. That's where you want to go. Yeah.
Yeah. So the assisted flow example is really striking. Same RFQ, under 5 minutes instead of 2 hours. What's the single biggest thing that make that possible? So you mentioned the data, right?
Clean data. Yeah, for sure.
Data. Yeah. Is there anything else?
You have to, so yes, and when I say clean data, it doesn't just mean a clean rate database, right?
Right.
Be careful. That's an easy place where people get stuck because having a clean rate database of my buy pricing is important, right? But I also need to have clean data around my customers and I need to have clean data around how I price. So how do I sell to those customers? So when you talk about clean data, go from buy to the customer to how do I sell to them? Am I selling them into a consolidation service? Is this a spot quote, like a back-to-back format? Am I quoting this business and intentionally, kind of taking a loss on this bid in order to do something bigger with them later on? Am I taking a loss on a handful of lanes for that customer in order to, gain business that I really want, and with better margins on other lanes? you kind of need to have an understanding of that and then kind of have that also built into your clean data. Yeah.
Mhm. And I believe it's also automation, right? So it's not only you need
Yeah.
something that can help you automate things more faster. And I'm thinking about a team that, they used to work in a certain way, and now you need to sell them that the big thing, like the AI, using of AI and automation, and probably they would be worried about that. So, and I believe it's because of they thinking that it's probably will be replacing them in a way.
Mhm.
How do you sell it to a team that actually think about that and
Yeah.
worry about that?
And there are a lot of people, AI is all the buzz these days, and
Right,
especially people get nervous when they see tech companies, cutting thousands of jobs
right.
and saying, "Oh, AI is able to do this or whatever." That's an okay, nice, maybe not so nice for people losing their jobs, but if we look and we think specifically about freight forwarders, and we look specifically at this industry, there's a few things. This industry, and I'm sure lots of people say this in other industries too, but I really feel very strongly this industry is so built, so tied to the relationship that forwarders have with their clients and that forwarders have with their service providers, the carriers, the truckers, the whatever, those are so key and built into everything that happens. Um, and then add on top of that that if you look at freight today, if it were a simple matter of if I'm going from I don't know from Shanghai to Buenos Aires, and I always use this carrier and this is always the conditions, etc., then you can start to think and start to see, oh, then maybe AI could take some of this on, right? But the reality in supply chain is that there's always something going on that is disrupting things, right? There's always an exception. So um, I don't believe that AI is a replacement for the human. I think AI is really it's another tool that humans and people can use in order to operate more efficiently, right? So freight forwarders exist because supply chains are complicated. Freight forwarders exist as problem solvers. Freight forwarders exist as exception managers. Yeah. So I absolutely think that AI has a place in our industry. I think it can add enormous value when it comes to answering simple questions like, hey, where's my freight? Right? We already see that happening today. I think it can certainly even assist when it comes to, you could even get to a place where you automatically quote, to customers based on certain logic, certain cargo types, certain weight restrictions, etc. There's absolutely a world where that exists. But AI for me is the tool that frees the person and the human beings up to focus 100% on where the complex decision making comes into place and really focusing on dealing with the issues and the challenges come up, which are ultimately going to be the things that are really where they add value for the customer, right? Let the AI take over kind of the manual, repetitive kind of stuff that's not driving a core value for your customer and really free the people up to focus on that. Yeah.
I totally agree. At the end of the day, it's empowering us.
Yeah. So and that kind of talks about our next slide, right? At the end of the day, it's all about a human being plus a system is about augmentation. It's not about replacement, right? It's about the mentality that we need to have is that the goal is not to remove the person. The person is the thing that we've lived, freight forwarders have lived and breathed all this complication for many, many, many years. You don't want to remove that. You want to remove the things that cause those people with all of that experience to not be able to get to the really exciting stuff, right? To get to the challenging parts. Let the AI, let the systems take over on that repetitive, task-driven kind of thing and really focus on adding value. Yeah. So how do we do that? That's kind of the next stage. How do you do that? We kind of started talking about it a bit before, but first, the first thing you got to do is again pull all that pricing together. Centralize your pricing into one place. Take all those portals, the Excel spreadsheets, the PDFs, the emails, etc. Get that into one place. Reduce the fragmentation. Yeah, reduce fragmentation, but at the same time, remember that you don't need perfection in order to make progress. Yeah. Is that saying that perfect is the enemy of good or perfect is the enemy of better? It's 100% true, right? Like, don't think you have to cover it all at once. Think about where are my core trade lanes? What's my core mode of transportation? Who are my core customers that I need to serve? Start there. Yeah. You don't need to have it perfect. 80% is better than zero. Yeah. At the end of the day. And then once you sort of have you start pulling together your pricing and you start aggregating that into one place, then you kind of want to start standardizing it. Standardizing it meaning think about putting together a process around what quotation workflows look like, leaving enough room in place for the pricing person to add their, let's say their secret ingredient, their special sauce, right? But give them the right process, give them the right tools, and then and then document that, right? So that it's clear. And then you need to, again, you can't expect, rip a band-aid off and expect people to be able to do all of this from day one. You need to give yourself time for people to adapt to change and to implement and to really buy into it. And what you want to look at doing, so I would suggest like setting some types of goals, targets, KPIs, OKRs, whatever you want to call them, along the way that are attainable. And the goal of those, as you set these like very reachable milestones, is that you're kind of reducing the amount of variation that's happening over time until you sort of come to a standardized process and flow. Um, After that, and you've kind of got those things in place, so you've got your data consolidated, you've got the right process in place of how you want to quote your customers. Then after that, that's where you can start introducing automation, yeah, to the process. Not necessarily, and I would not recommend using full-blown automation from the beginning, yeah, or let's see if that ever happens, but start to use your systems and look at systems to kind of pull together logic, suggestions, and starting to take care of some of the work that the operators and pricing teams can look at and confirm and work with. Yeah. And then as you do that, and the more you start automating and freeing people up to focus on where they really add value, that's what allows. So, and as you start to systematize more your data, and as you start clarifying your process and making tweaks along the way as you learn, that's what's really helping you build towards scale, right? So having the systems and the processes in place that allow you to have higher margin business and do things in a more systematized way. Yeah.
Mhm.
So with that, I think we'll kind of let's say so we can open this up to some questions at the end as well. My closing perspective, complexity is not going away. So and complexity to supply chains is not going away. I think it's getting more complex, to be fair. Which by the way is hard, but it is why freight forwarders exist at all, and I think it's always going to be that way. Um, so the complexity in quoting isn't going away, and the way that freight forwarders are procuring from their suppliers, that's kind of hybrid world where some stuff is online, some stuff is still kind of via Excel spreadsheets, etc. I don't think that's going away for the foreseeable future for years. So what needs to happen there, if I'm a forwarder and I'm looking at this and say, okay, this is my reality, I need to have a plan about how to manage that, right? So if procurement is fragmented and it's hybrid and it's I need to have a solution for how I'm managing that, right? Otherwise, I'm going to lack scale. Um, and then from there, where the freight forwarders who are going to do well in this world are the ones that start to look at the complexity in rate management and quoting and whatever else, and then find a way to manage that complexity better, right? You're not going to remove and completely make this 100% a smooth process. That's not going to happen, right? But managing that messiness and being able to operate in a world where you can deal with the exceptions and the things that come up and how and the complexity of quoting, that being able to manage that in a faster way is really where you're going to win. And then I think ultimately forwarders need to look at quoting as a strategic capability. I think a lot of forwarders look at quoting today as a transactional experience. Yeah, quote request comes in, I pull the quote together, quote goes back to customer. It's a transaction, right? But I think a lot of times quoting is it's important because it's one of the main forms of contact that is happening between the forwarder and their customer. And how you quote, how you pull together a quote, how you build sell pricing for customers, how you quote on different lanes and different modes, etc. Those are going to be founding parameters for how you grow your business at the end of the day, right? So putting the right systems in place, putting the right strategy around how that quoting happens needs to be looked at as not just a transaction, but a core piece of the business. Yeah. So I would absolutely recommend that as well.
Wow, that's awesome. Seriously, I'm getting some questions from the audience. One of them is Wayne, we are a team of 10 quoting operators right now, and we want to start improving, which is always great to hear. What is the one thing we should do first before any technology conversation? I think that you mentioned the data cleanup, but I think that there is one more thing about strategy, right,
Yeah,
Wayne?
I think, look, and there's so much software out there in the world. There's so many, especially nowadays, there's a new AI thing that's popping up every day, right? Um, and one of the mistakes that I see forwarders make is it happened with blockchain, right? When blockchain was the buzzword, everybody was running after, oh, we got to implement blockchain. They didn't know what it meant. I don't even know what it means either, really, to be fair, apart from something to do with Bitcoin, not my forte, but our Bitcoin uses blockchain. But anyway, um, people just run after whatever the buzzword is. I think take a step back first, look at as a freight forwarder, as a company, what are my goals, right? What am I looking to achieve in 2026? What am I looking to achieve over the next 3 years, over the next 5 years, right? And then the first thing you want to do is understand what your goals are. Talk to your people, talk to your teams that are on the ground, and really understand what they're doing and where they're experiencing pain, where they're experiencing inefficiency. And then you go look for the software tools to help deal with that, right? You got to identify the blockers to where you want to be as a company, and then get the right software that is going to help you address the pain so that you don't have the friction on the way towards, your defined parameters for success.
So, and I want to emphasize on that because we just got back, not just, but it was not now, but we got back from Manifest, and we've
Hmm.
seen so many AI softwares out there that are trying to sell to freight forwarders that not necessarily came from this industry. And one of the thing, and the biggest thing that I understood, that the gap is that they don't know how to speak the freight forwarding language, which is a huge, huge gap because just for the sake of saying Wisor is in a different aspect. We have our own customer success team who's coming from freight. So basically, we are speaking these languages. But this is another thing that I would like to mention to our audience. When you are picking the right software for you that addressing AI, just make sure that they know and understand your industry. Because again, it's a different language.
Yeah, I cannot agree with that more. I think the some of the best platforms and software systems that I've worked with and seen over the years, the people that sit behind it have lived the pain and felt the pain, yeah, along the way. It's really core, yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Wow. So we have more questions from the audience. So with the current Middle East crisis AF pricing is predominantly dynamic pricing, having to go out to airlines on a case-by-case basis. What suggestions are there to deal with this for a small theme? I can address this, but let's see what do you have on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, well, now we have the crisis happening or the conflict in the Middle East, which is
Right,
making things quite difficult. But it was a similar thing. This is what really boosted dynamic pricing at the beginning.
right,
Really was at COVID, right, where you also
right,
had not the same scenario, but you did have the same sort of disruptions, right, to flights. So yes, 100% dynamic pricing is real. But that said, the carriers, I think the difference between today and at the beginning of COVID, most carriers were still sort of operating in an offline world. Nowadays, I think if I remember the numbers correctly, something like 60 or 70 carriers are connected and online into digital marketplaces. Um,
right.
where you're able to instant search and instantly get real-time pricing from carriers. Maybe not every commodity, maybe it's not every carrier, but most of the major carriers in the world, I think it's 60 or 70 or something, are digitized and do have their capacity and pricing online. And so when you're looking at a tool for the kind of cleaning up that data, right? Um, I think all three of the major players out there in terms of air freight pricing platforms have APIs that you can either use the system itself or you can integrate that into your centralized depository. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question, because I'm thinking that we are running out of that time. Do you have any software recommendation that can integrate our rate sheets and automatically populate quotes for us? I
Well,
think that you got to the right place.
I think you're at the right place. I'll do the shameless plug at this point. Um, Wisor is quite good at doing just that. So I'm sure Adi can also, if you can maybe let people know how to reach out to the team at Wisor. It's a really cool solution of looking at just how to do that. Take all of your pricing, put it one place, and then automate your quotation flows afterwards. It's sort of what Wisor is all about. So that's the shameless plug. We'll stop doing any more of that. But yeah, yeah, check out Wisor for sure.
Yeah, I would love to have this quick demo for you guys. And so Wayne, I'm so thankful. Thank you so much. This was exactly the kind of practical, honest conversation that I think that it's missing from a lot of industry webinars and events. So I really appreciate your time and insights. To everyone who joined today, the recording will be sent to all registrants and people who actually didn't have the time to attend. So feel free even to share it with your team. If you have a follow-up questions, you are more than welcome to just send us an email. You can find us on our website, the contact us, demo request, whatever you feel like. You can see also the videos out there in our YouTube channel, a product video, which is really like easy to understand what we do. And of course, if you want to continue the conversation, please and welcome to reach out to us directly at Wisor. Thanks again, Wayne. Really appreciate this conversation with you and have a great rest of the day, guys.
Yeah, thanks to all the people who joined us. I really appreciate having you. And Adi, thanks for having me as well.
Of course. Thank you, guys. Bye
Take care.
bye.
Bye.